Transport is a very difficult sector to decarbonize, mainly because of its heavy fossil fuel use. 95% of transport is still powered by oil, and we also have embedded this sort of car-dependent lifestyles that are very hard to break out of.
Over a third of CO2 emissions in Europe come from transport. Most of that comes from land transport, and within that, most of that comes from car travel. So as you can see, there's really a big contribution of our everyday travel behaviors on CO2 emissions.
Now, active mobility, which is the topic of this paper and the study, has the potential really to be a game changer in this space. But policymakers and practitioners really lack the empirical evidence behind this. So we asked the question, how much carbon can be saved by active mobility in cities? And we had the opportunity to use a data set collected over the last few years in 7 cities across Europe to answer this question. So who took part in the study? We recruited about 4,000 people in 7 European cities. Those participants were asked to fill in travel diaries. Now, a travel diary is a sort of a list of all the trips you do in a course of a day or a week. In this case, we asked them to do this for 1 day. All the trips they did from home to work by car or by bike or any other forms of transport people were using. Then we calculated the carbon footprint for each of these trips and added them up to a daily carbon footprint, also accounting for what's called life cycle emissions. That takes into account the manufacturing, maintenance and recycling of materials for bikes, e-bikes, cars, buses, trains, you name it. And what we found is a number of things. I think the most striking finding is this difference between people who do cycle, at least once a day, and people who don't cycle at all are not really into that space. And the difference was about 84% in terms of their daily carbon footprint, which is quite significant. Now, if you take this and scale it up to, for example, a person over a course of a year, if a person switched modes from car to bike, just for 1 trip a day, but do this fairly regularly, sort of maybe like a commute to work. So assuming this is 200 days a year, that would save about half a ton of carbon. Now, half a ton doesn't seem very much, but if you scale this up across Europe, if, for example, just 1 in 5 people would do this over a course of a year, then you would reduce the carbon emissions from car travel by 8%. 8%, and that's quite significant, and that's why this study probably is quite important.
Climate change, as we saw in this paper, can have huge benefits from promotions of active travel. But in addition to that, when you get people out of their cars and onto bicycles or walking or public transport, you get them to be physically active. And we know that more than a third of Europeans are physically inactive. And we know that almost 400,000 people die every year from air pollution. And when you take away cars from the street, then there's an opportunity to use this space for creating public spaces, creating green spaces which have multiple health benefits, and the list goes on. So what interested me in this project is that we were able to look at, from different angles, how we can make the case for active travel, how we can show decision makers, policy makers, that by promoting active travel, you're getting a lot bigger bang for your buck than if you just look at one specific aspect at a time.
At the recent climate change conference held in Glasgow, COP26, the transport day, sort of the only day really dedicated to anything around transport, was very much focused on electric vehicles and just electric vehicles. And industry was really pushing for this to get maybe governments to finance the infrastructure for this. Active travel, public transport, shared mobility wasn't even mentioned at the beginning. Frans Timmermans, the chief negotiator of the European Union at COP26 and the Vice President of the European Commission, quoted some of the findings from the study. You know, that 84% of difference between cyclists and non-cyclists. A number of key policymakers pushed for some of the declarations to include active travel, which at the end of the day happened. So there's a paragraph now in the declaration of COP26 that says active travel, shared mobility and public transport should be part of any thinking around the future of mobility.
First and foremost, we need to engage policymakers in creating the type of environments that will promote active travel. Creating the space that we need for safe walking and cycling for everyone to engage in active travel. It's a climate change strategy that is engaging, that will generate a more beautiful, healthy lives for all of us in the future.